So I get asked all the time, what are evictions like? How can you be so mean to evict those people? No, it's not about changing their locks and turning off their water. We don't do that here in North Carolina and most anywhere else in the country. So let's take a walk through exactly how this happens. Stick around. We're going to talk about how to file, how to send notices, what happens when a tenant fights back, and give you a couple little life stories here in the process. I do get asked all the time about evictions, and a lot of people say, how can you be so mean? Or man, I would invest in property, except for I got to deal with those tenants. What happens if they don't pay? Yeah, it's a problem, okay? I have a phrase, you got to pay to stay. And so sometimes you do, you have to evict. And it's just a problem you have to learn and you have to figure out, but it's not really that big of a deal. Here in our society, we live in a civilized society. You know, back in the day when I first started, yeah, you know, I've been known to change some locks and turn off the water and do some other craziness in my youth. And but now we have laws against all this. In our civilized society, we have ways that we behave and treat each other and take good care of each other. And so we have processes. And as long as everybody follows the process, it can be very civilized and it works out quite well. Every state is different, and that's what you have to realize. And you need to learn the laws of your state. Some states are extremely tenant friendly and some states are very landlord friendly. And so I do not invest in states that are very tenant friendly because some tenants can stay without paying for a year, and that's just painful. It doesn't help you pay your bills. It doesn't help you with your investment strategy. So that's a key point when you're thinking about investing in other markets. And but if you live in one of those tenant friendly states, maybe you need to come and invest here like in North Carolina and other states that have a more moderate approach. So it's really not that hard. You just have to learn your process and follow the process. Here in North Carolina, now listen, these processes are well documented, and over time things change. You know, like we went through COVID and there were moratoriums and all kinds of changes in the processes and things. So you need to just get some familiarity. Boy, that's a hard word. Get familiar with what's current. And so, but take a look and double check me, fact check me a little bit. But typically you have to give somebody notice. Hey, look, you didn't pay your rent, and even though my lease might even say, hey, I don't owe you any notice, I've got to give them notice anyway. And in North Carolina, generally it's a 10-day notice, and say, hey, look, you got to pay or get out. Once you cross that notice, then you go and you file the paperwork with the court, and it all gets typically handled through the small claims court, which is nice. Small claims court, it's not a jury trial, it's handled by the judge, it's adjudicated, big fancy word, by the judge, and they get notified that there's a court appearance, and generally we show up to court, and the tenant has a right to speak their case, and the landlord has the right to speak their case, and then the judge decides. Now, typically if you're filing for non-payment of rent, it's pretty straightforward. They either paid or they didn't pay, and unless they prove that they did pay, generally it's sided with the landlord, and the judge says, yep, boom, and then they have an appeal period. And then in the appeal period, they can file an appeal, but then after the appeal period is done, then you can go and file what we call writ of possession and execute the ejectment. All these fancy terms, these fancy legal terms. And then the sheriff schedules you a time, and you meet the sheriff and you go and you change the locks. And the tenants are supposed to leave at that time. And then they have a period to remove their belongings if they haven't already done so. And you know, the whole thing takes somewhere around 45 days. It used to be about 30 days, but now it's kind of stretching out to 45. By the time you get the schedule on the judge docket, you get a schedule for the sheriff, all those things can take a period of time. And then you have to deal with their things. So it's really kind of like a 45-day kind of cycle. But then after those deadlines pass, then you can take possession of the property and go in and re-rent it and get back on track. So in North Carolina, it's not a 1 or 2 year process. It's a little shorter. If the tenant does appeal, however, it can stretch out to district court. I just had one that actually did the appeal. First time in my 30-year history, and pretty crazy. And they did. They filed an appeal. They kind of messed up on one of their processes, and we were able to kind of finish executing the writ of possession and changing the locks and kind of working through that process. So the nice thing is a very civilized, organized process. It's not random. It's not meant to be mean. It's just meant to settle our differences, right? And that's what the courts are all about. They're about settling differences. And certainly if the tenant is able to pay, and the landlord decides to accept that payment, then they get to stay. Simple as that. Sometimes these processes can be comical. Although civilized, they can be fairly comical. One time I bought a little small apartment community, and I was told, hey, listen, this one tenant, he's a little tough to deal with, and he doesn't quite pay on time. He doesn't really take you very seriously. So I knew it was going to be a little tricky. And the first rent came around, and he said, hey, Greg, I'll catch you on Thursday. So I said, well, that's not going to do for me. See, I need it today. So I went ahead and gave them a notice that, hey, look, in 10 days or whatever, I'm going to need that, or you're going to have to pack your stuff. And generally, that's kind of how I approach it. Is I sit there and say, no problem. Thursday's before the notice day. So as long as you pay me on Thursday, then you can stay. But if you don't, then you're going to have to get out. And so sure enough, he didn't come through with the Thursday. And then I went to court. The tenant didn't show up. That's okay. The judge still sees it anyway. And we worked through the process. I was awarded the judgment to be able to take possession. A notice got posted on this guy's door that we're coming next week to lock him out. And when we showed up, he's there watching TV, just sitting on his couch. And he looked up and he said, what do you mean I got to be out? We talked about this. The deputy gave him 5 minutes to gather his things. And we usually call it the people, the pills, and the pets. You gather the things that are important to you, and then you have to leave. And that's what happened. It's almost like he didn't believe I was going to go through with it. Although I told him multiple times, and the court told him multiple times, he had to gather his things and just kind of walk down the street. So it just happens. So it's not mean, it's just a process. An eviction, typically, it's a legal process that you go through, that landlords and tenants go through together to really enforce the contract. A lot of people go through the eviction process for a failure to pay, but there could also be a breach of contract for other reasons. Bring in a pet, okay? Bring in an unauthorized pet, that's a breach of contract. Or, hey, look, they violated a noise ordinance or a noise regulation or something like that. Or there's even illegal drug use in the property, and that's obviously against the law and against the lease. So all those could be reasons to declare a breach of contract. And then once there's a breach of contract, then the possession needs to go back to the landlord. Now listen, I skipped every day of law schools, so I'll be the first to admit that I'm not giving any legal advice, but that's generally how it works. I've seen it to be very difficult to try to enforce the contract of the lease without payment, because to cure the breach, they just simply have to prove that they fixed it. Right? Well, how do you fix a noise problem? Right? Well, I'm not being noisy anymore. I need to be able to stay. Right? It gets a little gray. But certainly if they haven't paid rent, that's why usually most evictions happen. A lot of landlords will try to cure the other breaches just by talking through the tenant, working through it and everything, unless it's real egregious. You know, like, hey, you're only supposed to be 2 people living in the property, and all of a sudden there's 10, and there's a bunch of unauthorized occupants, and you're destroying the property and all that. I got to get you out. So it becomes a little bit more of a complicated legal matter. And at some point, I would recommend that you hire an attorney, right, to do this. A lot of times people will go on their own to walk through an eviction process, and certainly I've done that numerous times doing it on my own. But when it gets a little sticky and a little more complicated, that's when I bring in the big guns. The main thing to remember, just like with anything, is that you should never approach anything with fear. You should approach everything with education. And so people come up to me and say, hey, I'm afraid of what would happen if I have to go through an eviction process. It's probably best if you just get educated on what your local law says about what that looks like. It's usually pretty well defined. It's a step-by-step process. And if you need to hire a professional, that's what they're there for. And so if you have mentors and you have professionals in your corner, why are you so afraid, right? It's like, I'm afraid of driving. Well, okay, get out there and practice a little bit. Get somebody to show you how to drive. Like we at some point had to overcome that fear, right? So the same thing is with these processes of dealing with the tenants. Just walk through the step-by-step process and hire a professional if you need that. As simple as that. It's no big deal. So if you liked what you learned, hit subscribe, like all those kind of crazy things and the bells and whistles and things. We're constantly trying to bring you knowledge and good education to improve your results and improve your chances of success in investing in real estate. So like and subscribe today.